Alrighty, welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of Pass the Salt podcast, where the three of us talk about things we are not nearly qualified enough to discuss. And today we're going to be discussing a topic that is very close and dear to my heart, and that is doubt in the Christian faith. And the reason why I suggested that we discuss this is that because I feel like doubt is such a universal experience for every Christian, and not just for Christians. I think for any human being alive, I think doubt is just such a human experience that I think is gaining traction nowadays, especially in the Christian community. By the way, hello Sarah, we love you very much. Is gaining traction, especially in the Christian community. Yet despite, more books being written about it, more sermons being preached about it, I feel that despite all this material out there, Christians are still not equipped to deal with doubt. And this podcast will not equip you either. But I think it would at least be nice to share our experiences with doubt and for everybody who's watching to get some kind of comfort, hopefully. So that was my goal in designing this podcast. So I'm going to give you a very, very rough outline of how the evening's discussion is going to go. I have boiled down, and again, chat, if you have thought of another, if you think of something else, please feel free to shoot it into the chat. We will see it. We will respond to it. You know how it goes. But I've boiled it down to basically 4 reasons why a Christian goes through doubt. And the fourth one we won't really get into because I feel it won't be really conducive to the conversation. So the first one is other Christians. Either we've really admired another Christian for so long, or we've been following a pastor for some time, and then they either morally fail somehow, or they hurt us in some way. And that, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why Christians experience doubt. Reason 2 is they didn't emotionally experience the presence of God, and so their faith becomes kind of like a desert wasteland in terms of the heart, if that makes any sense. 3 is a Christian encounters another very intelligent non-Christian, and they point out something that might be inconsistent in their beliefs. They point out a point of the Bible that might have been interpreted a different way, and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, could the Bible be interpreted this way? This is what I call deconstruction, and we can also go into the growing deconstruction movement in North America. And the 4th is open rebellion. So, which, again, kind of harsh way to say it. But basically, you're living in sin that you like a lot and you don't want to let go of it. But I don't think that's conducive to the conversation today. I want this to be an encouraging night. And I also think that it's not our place to talk about that one. So anyway, so just those 3 reasons for doubt. I thought we would open the night up with some prayer, and then we can all dive in.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds like a plan. Awesome. Tommy, would you like to pray for us?
Sure, I could definitely pray for us. All right, let's
Nice.
start with prayer. Dear God, thank you so much for allowing us to come on to our streaming platform to be able to talk about our doubts in faith and Christian faith, Lord. May we be able to dedicate this time to you. May we be able to have constructive discussion. May this all be in good fun and good faith. That we're not trying to belittle anyone or attack anyone. It's all just we hope that it would be fruitful discussion and helpful for those listening and for us here running the podcast here as well. Thank you so much for everything that you do, and in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, so I thought to begin we could talk about seasons in our own life when we have experienced doubt in the Christian faith. Steve, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I think for me, so I became Christian in 2002, so it's been quite a long journey. But yeah, I think there's many many times where I've doubted Christ and I've doubted my faith. Um, even like even before I became Christian, there were a lot of like even going, I guess going into Christianity, becoming Christian, that journey was there was a lot of kind of questions around why why should I believe Christ and why should I kind of yeah, be a Christian, right? And why should I believe who Jesus is? And I think uh like yeah, if you were here for our first podcast, you know our stories a little bit as well. But essentially, like I think Christ did a lot of things that helped me understand who he is, and he showed me a lot of cool things, or like quote unquote, I guess, miraculous things that didn't really make sense
Mm.
for human beings to be able to do. And that was a lot of the reason why I became Christian as well, right? And I think during my journey and during my time as a Christian, there are definitely a lot of times. It's always like a roller coaster. I don't know about you guys, but for me, my faith journey, well, okay, I wouldn't say it's always a roller coaster, but a lot of the time it is a roller coaster of up and downs, of kind of like highs and lows. And during a lot of the low times, I think it is a lot of the time during that low time is the point where um, doubt comes in, right? And doubt of uh, who Christ is and why we believe what we believe comes into play. And we always question Christ of like, oh, why is this bad thing happening to me? Or why is this happening to me
Mm.
during your downs, right? And I think for me, like one of the I think one of the points, like obviously there are a lot of examples, but one of the points was when when I remember my first ever mission trip. Um I think was in like 2012, I want to say 2011, 2012.
Where did you go?
I went to Bangladesh for my
Oh,
first ever mission trip, and it was a really long mission trip. It was with like a group of church organization, and uh, the mission trip itself was I won't go too much into details, but the mission trip itself was like around 6 to 7 weeks, I think, and then we had to raise $5,200, or like just over $5,000
easy.
for the mission
Doable.
trip.
Hmm.
And yeah, it is doable and it is quite a bit. And for like for those who've been on mission trips, like like that's a like relatively normal amount, right? Like some are obviously some might be higher, some might be slower, but it is on the higher end, I would say, like over
Hmm.
$5,000 for a trip. And then I remember like I was so excited when I first heard first got the invitation to go, right? And I was super excited to go and super excited to join the trip. And then I had like because it was my first mission trip, I had no idea how hard fundraising was going to be for the trip.
Hmm.
And during my like we got like I think like half a year-ish to fundraise. And during that like half a year, like there was a point where like I started questioning why God called me onto that mission trip. Because at the beginning of the like the invitation, I was so excited and I was like, "Oh, God is calling me to go on this mission trip, whatever," right? And
Hmm.
then during the fundraising part, it got to a point where it was just so hard to fundraise, and I felt so bad asking people for money. I felt so bad trying to fundraise and worrying about all the things of like, hey, what's going to happen if I don't raise the money? Like, why is God calling me to do something that like I don't feel comfortable with, right? Like I didn't
Hmm.
feel comfortable asking people for money. And therefore I didn't even get a lot of fundraiser. And I think a lot of did you have a question?
Yeah. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask because something that you brought up actually reminded me of another source of doubt. So would
Yeah.
you say that, with this mission trip, with this fundraising, um, would you say that would you say that you felt as if God was not fulfilling his promise to provide, or
Yeah,
would you
for
say that that
sure.
okay?
I think yeah, there's definitely that, right? Of
Mhm.
like yeah, like one of the questions that I had running through my mind was that like as a follower, as someone, as a faithful servant,
Yeah.
like I've done my part in kind of accepting uh or like this is my thought, right? Like I've done
Mhm.
my part to accept the invitation to go on this mission trip that I felt like you were calling me to. So why aren't you providing me with the funds to do it if
Mhm.
like you were calling me to do it, right? And I
And
think
yeah. And if I could
yeah,
just like cut in really quick here, Steve, and just say I feel like one of especially for um especially for people who grew up in the church, I would say that, as you grow up, some a consistent theme that comes up in Sunday school and sermons and service or whatever is the promises of God. And tell me if you have anything you want to say, feel free to interject. But like, how God promises to always provide for his children. Matthew 6, don't worry because God's going to provide what you need. Or you see all these miracles where God provided miraculously, like Jesus feeding the 5,000, or um, Elijah when he's like showing off to the prophets of Baal, and God provides the fire that they needed to make the sacrifice. We see all these repetitive themes of God fulfilling His promises, and yet when we encounter something that is completely out of our control, like fundraising, right? For
yeah,
example,
yeah.
and we don't see it happening as we expected it. I feel that is also a source of doubt, and I feel like that is tied with not experiencing God the way that we were promised to. We were promised that we would experience Him. Anyway, Steve, please continue.
Yeah, so yeah, for sure. So I think like the doubt of kind of God not providing everything that essentially quote unquote I thought he would provide
Hmm.
was one of the biggest kind of doubts I had of why like he called me on the trip. And then as well as so for me like in terms of I guess like my parents, um they weren't like my parents aren't like against me going on mission trips, but at the same time they're not like super like supportful of me going on mission trips as well.
Mm-hmm.
Especially that first mission trip because I was going to Bangladesh, and at the time there was a lot of protests going on, and I think like one, my parents were like worried about my safety, right? Because they obviously they didn't grow up Christian either, so they don't really have the experience or knowledge of how like mission trip works, of how like the concept of like what a mission trip looks like, right? And so they were worried that I was going overseas into like unknown territory kind of, and
Mm-hmm.
they were sort of like they weren't like fully they weren't like oh like we're super against you going, but they weren't very supportive in terms of like even like funding or even in terms of kind of just like me going overall, right? They were just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, like you can go if you want, but like just be careful kind of thing. Like that, right? So then I think that also kind of um like like frustrated me and also
Mm-hmm.
kind of made me doubt of like why is God calling me on this mission trip if he's gonna put so many challenges ahead of me, um or put so many kind of obstacles, kind of quote unquote preventing me from going to on this trip, right? And yeah, I think I really struggled a lot about doubt, um, and faith during that period of time, during that 6 months. But I think I also learned a lot about what it means to fully trust God and to really understand what it means to uh, like yeah, like what it means for him to provide for us, and what that actually means in terms of like yes, he does provide for us, that all we need, right? But then we take it as like, oh, like kind of like everything we want. Well, like if God doesn't give it to us, he's the bad guy, right? Like we take it a lot of times like that, but then it's not like that, right? Like it's a lot of the time it's like he gives us what we want, but in his own way and in his own timing, right?
Mm,
And I think that's very important as well, to understand that like sometimes the things that we want aren't necessarily like aligned with what he has prepared for us, uh,
mhm.
and yeah, in his timing, he will provide us with everything that we need, right? Um,
For sure, for
yeah.
sure. So, and Tommy, I'm gonna pass the baton to you in just a second
Mhm.
because I would also like to hear your experiences with doubt. Um, so that notion of what us wanting, what our desires are, not being in line with what God's desires are, um, and God providing different fruit than we would hope for or expect, and that producing doubt. I would like to come back to that in just a second because I feel that um, there are a lot of misconceptions there also that circle the church. But before I do, Tommy, please share your experiences with that if you're cool with that.
So for myself, so for me, as some may know, for those that know me, I am born into a Christian family. My father's a pastor, and so I've known church my whole life. Kind of
Mm,
situation. I've shared this on our first episode, um, but with that, it's like you get into a point where going to church and thing becomes like a daily routine rather than something you choose to do. Um, and so
mm,
I've struggled a lot with figuring out what it means uh, to be like what it means to be saved and to declare that Jesus is Lord and Savior. So that was a big
mhm,
one. Because just because you grew up in it doesn't mean you believe in it and doesn't mean you state it as true. And
absolutely.
then the second thing was that being going into science specifically, there's always issues with how the whole debate of evolution versus creationism and that whole deep hole of debating and all that kind of stuff. And so having to come to terms with that as a person of science was not easy.
Mm,
I guess for me it was, I would say, relatively easier than others. Like I know others who have struggled like immensely with that topic.
mhm,
But for myself, if science is my take of it is science is discovering how the world works, and creationism is God has created things to be such a way, then science is just a method of figuring out how God works. So
mm,
that's how I've connected the two together, and I've kind of come to terms with understanding why we study science. And like listening to all the debates, like, oh, if you follow the Old Testament and you follow the time and the dates as is written, then it means the Earth is only like 6,000 years old. I'm like, that's not true. Like there's a lot. You can go really deep into it, because there's a lot of technicalities behind timelines and stuff like that, and you know, we can't deny that dinosaurs didn't exist. Like these are things we can't deny, but at the same time, we also can't deny that Jesus
I
Christ has a
mean,
but like it could still point.
around, do vaccines really work? Everything can be
Yeah, it's like
debated.
you can't even deny that Jesus Christ as a person existed. Because if we look at it not just from a Christian point of view, from literally like historic point of view, Jesus Christ is technically the most cited person, one of the more cited people in history, accurately
Mhm,
cited. Whether
mhm,
or not you believe in the resurrection and what we believe in as Christians is a whole different story, but you can't, if you believe that history is true and the way we study history is true, then Jesus Christ as a figure existed, and that is fact.
mhm.
It's essentially, it's almost fact. If you say it's not, then Alexander the Great didn't exist. Like,
And would you say that uh I guess you would consider the conclusive evidence that Jesus had to have walked the earth. Deity can be debatable, but the conclusive evidence that he actually did walk this earth. Would you say that that was kind of like a rock to keeping your faith despite your sciencey brain?
I actually never. I don't think I've ever doubted that Jesus Christ walked the earth. I don't think that was ever a doubt. Everything I've
Okay.
discovered in science is like
Yeah.
it has always been like, oh, that reinforces what I believed in my Christian faith.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
like, for
Interesting.
example, like there are things that science can do,
Hmm.
that we can kind of predict what nature is going to do. For example, when you
Hmm.
look at when you tune into the weather network and you're like, oh, how hot is it tomorrow? That's almost accurate to like 1 or 2 degrees. Like no one doubts temperature. However, the
Yeah.
one thing that you cannot predict is weather. So weather and temperature are two different things. So
Ashley is gonna say
you
she always does the weather
yeah,
network.
so the temperature can be predicted almost to like a plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees, which is great. That's insane. Like we understand climate to that extent, but weather itself is impossible to predict because, like I've learned in university, like weather follows a chaotic system, and what a chaotic system is literally it's just random. There you if you run this if you were ran like a program like a code
Mm.
multiple times, you would get a different result every single time. And so, like, how weather is predicted for the weather network and how, like, the percentages work is the understanding of, like, oh, if we ran this scenario of Toronto, like, 50,000 times, and 40% of those 50,000 scenarios said it's going to rain.
Mm.
So when you put it in that perspective, a 40% chance of rain isn't actually that much, right? I ran 50,000 scenarios and only 40% of them said it's going to rain. That means a majority of it didn't. And so, to
If I
me, like,
can, yeah.
yeah, so
Or,
sorry. Wait, let me finish that. So it's like, so if that idea of weather is like, it's chaotic and you can't predict it, then to me, it reinforces the fact that you can't predict everything that God does. So that was my connection and strengthening of my personal doubts that I struggled with science and Christianity, and then that strengthened me, and I never had that doubt ever again. Moving onwards.
Interesting. I'm gonna write something that I noted from what you said down, because I think it will come up. I think it's gonna be important to mention later when we discuss getting through doubt. So I'm gonna write that down, keep that in mind. But the tangent that I wanted to say, super sorry, sidetrack. I learned
No worries.
yesterday through TikTok that apparently when they say like 40% chance of rain, they don't mean like there's a 40% chance of rain. They mean 40% of the people in the area are going to experience rain. Apparently that's what
That's not
precipitation
entirely true. No,
is. That
yeah, no,
not?
it's
Okay,
it's
I
it's
watched on
literally
TikTok, so
no, literally percentage of precipitation is literally within this area when when you run this program like 100 like millions of times essentially, right? 40% of those
yeah,
scenarios that we ran are it like
yeah.
says it's going to rain. So it's literally like because the only way we can predict weather and temperature is literally through
Oh, fact
like
check.
scenarios and calculations, right? That's what science is. We run equations, we run like statistics and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just going through an idea of understanding that, oh yeah, out of a million scenarios, 400,000 of those scenarios said it's going to rain. And then like, okay, so it's 400,000
Interesting.
scenarios of rain and then 600,000 scenarios where it's not going to rain. And it's like when you put it into that perspective, it really goes to show that whether it says it's going to rain on the weather network, sometimes it doesn't because it
So
doesn't.
it is just chances. Okay, so TikTok
Yeah.
has lied to me yet again. Ashamed, ashamed.
You say yet again, so the fact that it lied to you before and then you took this time as fact is a
Oh
whole
my
other
god.
story.
Okay, that's a lot
We
to
need
unpack.
to
Discernment will be
Yet
a topic
again.
for
Yet
another
again.
time. It will be a
we
topic
need
for
to
another
talk
time.
about this for a little bit. Oh yeah.
Interesting, interesting. So, so okay. So what I'm noticing with both you, Tommy, and you, Steve, Steve, with you, Steve, I feel like the general theme of doubt that you've experienced in your life, again, correct me if I'm wrong, love to be corrected, is that you didn't see God fulfill his promises the way that you expected, and that led to doubt. Whereas for Tommy, your doubt kind of came from a more I guess like deconstructionist approach where, you're or not but then again, science only kind of like affirmed what you already believe though,
Pretty much,
right?
yeah. So
Right.
it's like you I ran into an issue where it's like I shouldn't put it on the side burner. Like I can't be like, "Oh, I'll get to that topic later." Like if I am to call myself
Mhm.
Christian, that is a topic that I had to come to terms myself if I ever needed
Mhm.
to speak on it, because I mean that is a topic that speaks, like, that is of high debate, like highly debated topic. So, yeah, for me it was like
Okay.
it,
So
it,
would
it
you
delved
say
into
yeah.
doubt. Yeah. It kind of like touched upon
So
doubt and questioning.
would you say that most of your doubt kinda came from like an intellectual root?
Yeah, I would say so. A lot of it is
Okay.
logical, like finding logic,
Okay.
and trying to figure out how logic works with all of it. Um,
Mhm.
and that's where, like, I mean, and I'm sure you'll talk about it, but like the whole thing about apologetics and stuff, right? It's like
I love me
you
some apologetics.
yeah, like it's that understanding of trying to break it down logically and explaining it logically as well to an
Mhm.
individual. So I didn't dive into apologetics, but it's kind of like that kind of realm of coming to an understanding where it all kind of pieces together.
Mhm. Mhm. I hear you. Okay, interesting. Interesting that we've got kind of different sources of doubt here, which I love, and there will be a point to it later. But if I might very quickly share my own experiences with doubt, I think one one source of doubt for me was I would put my trust in a lot of these like great pastors, like great preachers, right? And I would trust everything that they said. I like their sermons, their words were Bible to me, essentially. For example, John Piper. I've always joked around with my friends that like the only excusable sin is idolatry of John Piper because we all love desiring God so much.
Oh no.
We were like, the only excusable sins were like worshiping the great Puritans and the anyway, not idolatry, not a yoke, not a joke. We're don't don't idolatry, but I would
Oh,
trust in these
man.
pastors, right? And then when they said something that uh that I disagreed with or that I saw was not actually applicable to the world. For example, I won't name which pastor because I can't remember which, but when he was like, "Oh, you can just like pray depression away," I was like, mm,
Ooh.
maybe. Practically speaking, never seen that happen. And so when like these inconsistencies would come up with these people specifically, it I would think, okay, well, if they're wrong about this thing and they're so confident, even though they're dead wrong in this thing. Like, what else could they be wrong about? And that led to a lot of doubt for me. And then another source of doubt for me was also not really experiencing God. So you know how I don't know about the churches that you guys grew up in, but then in where I grew up is like, oh, you can experience God as you would a friend. It's a personal relationship. You can talk to him just like as I'm talking to you right now. And I never experienced that. Praying didn't feel like talking to anybody. It just felt like shouting into the void sometimes. And because I didn't have that personal experience, that like felt presence of the Lord, that led to a lot of doubt also, which also kind of ties in with not experiencing the promises of God in the way that we expect. So um as you can see, a whole bunch of different ways that doubt kind of springs up. Um and so I would like to talk about uh uh what it's like to experience our fallen heroes. That's kind of what I labeled that first segment. And then two, um, fallen heroes. And then the second segment would be kind of around what Steve was describing in his own story. Thank you for sharing, Steve. Where you didn't see his promises. The promises weren't fulfilled, which have kind of tied in with not experiencing Jesus personally. And then the third topic, which I think might be our hottest topic, given the traction it's gained, especially in America, is something kind of surrounding Tommy's testimony. By the way, thank you for sharing, Tommy, about deconstruction and like challenging your own beliefs and logically thinking about things and coming up with, oh, my own beliefs are wrong here. What does that mean now? So to start off with fallen heroes, I think something that I want to talk about also, because I feel like a lot of people have also experienced this and experienced doubt from it, is when um, another Christian in the church hurts us. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. Have you guys ever
Oh, I've
experienced?
seen it. I've seen it. I've heard stories of it. I have friends who's went through it. Like sadly, that's a common topic,
For sure.
right?
For sure.
It happens.
Do you mind sharing a little more about your experiences, or without giving things away, giving identities away, sharing what you've witnessed?
Sure. I think a general thing is that bullying exists. I want everyone to remember that. Like, bullying exists. Doesn't matter if you're Christian or not, right? And just because you're Christian and you're in a church and you're at a retreat, whatever it might be, doesn't mean that you weren't bullying someone. It's like, oh, it's out of good fun. Like, we're friends here. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. Like, we all love each other. It's like, that ain't love. That ain't love, yo. Like, some of it got extreme. Like, I've heard stories and I've seen things, and I'm like, there's a point where it crosses a line, and it clearly crossed the line. And I think some of those people don't realize that they've done so. And they've also never apologized for it either. Because I mean, humans are prideful people, right? And so they'll believe like, oh, he's just soft for not taking it that way. And I'm like, that's not okay. And I think with the recent things about, like, I see Janie mentioned in the chat, is like that recent change over the past like 5-6 years about the importance of mental health, right? That depression is a real thing. That mental health is a real thing, right? It's not that someone's weak. It's like, no, it's that's the cause. That's the root cause. Everyone has their own limits and boundaries to these things, right? And so that's what now churches and cultures are realizing, like, oh, it is important and we need to watch what we say sometimes, right? And so like there's one aspect of that, and then there's the other aspect, which is like, should I swear? I don't know. No, I shouldn't swear because this is gonna go on Spotify.
Family-friendly channel.
Yeah,
This
this is normally I would swear I will swear every now and then on my stream, because I mean, like, I have my other stance on swearing. That's a whole different topic. But it's because the terminology in society uses the swear word, but it's the F boys in the church. And so what I mean by that is like okay, you've heard stories, and I've seen stories where it's like, let's say I'm an F boy, and I'm like trying to reach out to Ashley and like hit on Ashley kind of thing. Say, hey, or in Korean, as we call it, like the church oppas. And so it's like, hey, like, you're new here. Do you want like, so you want some, like, how are you doing? You want some guidance? How are you? Like, oh, we have Bible studies these days, and then you get to know each other. Hey, you want to come over to my place sometime? We can pray. We can have a good time. It's like, yo, you fall for prayer? What do you mean? Like, that's like prayer, yo. You like
pray,
right? It's like, you want a Netflix and pray? Like, hello? That's not prayer. You're not looking for prayer. That's clearly a thirst trap. Like,
that's deals together.
It's so bad.
Want a prayer walk together. Don't even get me started on the F boys in the church. That could be a whole.
But you get what I'm saying, right? Those people exist. And like, I've even heard from people that go to my church, and like, I've had conversations where, like, well, obviously not everyone goes for church for because they're Christian, right? We have a friend, like, it's a friendly environment. People make friends there and they go for their friends. And then that in itself causes issues where it's like, oh, not. And then when new people sometimes come see that, and then it's the idea where it's like, these people aren't following the things that I do, or that they should be doing. And then that causes a ripple effect, right? Right. And that's also an issue. So those three things are like the dominant issues, where it's like, number one is bullying. You've seen it happen, and it
Mhm.
steers people away. Number two is those F boys that, and hey, it could be F girls too. Not gonna be gender, like it's gonna be gender neutral, but
Mhm.
they exist and they
Mhm.
cause a lot of damage to people
Absolutely.
within the church. And then
Absolutely.
number three would be like people who are new to churches and realize that the people members of the church don't do Christian things, right?
And
And yeah.
absolutely. And Stephen, I would also really like your input on it. But if I can just say, I think first of all, in my experience with when you mentioned bullying, it just immediately triggered me because I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but cliques in the church, you know
Oh, I
what I
mean that's
mean?
normal. That's normal. That's in any like social setting has
Any
cliques.
social setting cliques, right?
Yeah.
But I remember, and now I've come to accept it. Like, yeah, like some people are just gonna like gravitate towards each other, and some other people are just not gonna fit into those particular groups, and that's okay in the sense that it's to be expected. You know, um, it's to be expected, and obviously we should be trying to work against that. But like, it's not. I've learned the hard way that like not being able to fit into a particular group of people doesn't speak to anything about your worth. Anywho, but I remember seeing these cliques. It brought a whole storm of doubt in me, especially when I was in high school, because in Sunday schools and when the pastor was preaching, they preach how God is love and God calls us to love as He loves others, and the love of God looks like this, and therefore Christians should behave in this way, and yet you see these people in the church who might even be in like prominent positions like worship leaders, small group leaders, etc., who are not behaving in that way, and it brings about a slew of doubt, because if it's like, okay, if Christians are supposed to behave this way and be this welcoming and they're not, then like, what God do you serve? I remember that being a huge source of doubt for me when I was just starting out my faith. But yeah, more on, the Christian conduct is super 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 important, I think, because unfortunately the way people see Christians is the way that, especially people who are not in the church, the way people see Christians, people make the fallacy that Christians are like their Christ, and that's the way it should be. But they make this mistake that Christians demonstrate Christ perfectly, and that if Christians behave like this, if they're screwing around with girls' hearts and bullying others and like doing that, it must mean that like God is either condoning what they're doing or God is like that also. Steve, what are your thoughts on our fallen heroes or broken people in the church causing others to doubt?
Um, okay, so for me, I definitely agree with uh, like everything you guys said. In terms of, yeah, like in terms of what Tommy said, like bullying definitely happens in church as well, and what you said, right? Like what you said in terms of, I guess there are cliques, and um, as a Christian, uh, it's it is very sad to see that, or like a lot of doubt, like voicing kind of what you said, like a lot of doubt comes from kind of seeing how others, especially people who are more like, if you're a new kind of member of the church,
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, right? Like if you go into a church and all the kind of leaders or all the people that part of that church are acting essentially, kind of like, I was gonna say sus, but like that's not the
Sussy
Among
that's not the
us,
vodka.
right
among
word.
us,
Among us. Yeah,
among
are
us.
acting like non-Christian, right? Or like acting suspicious in like weird ways, then like you start to have a doubt of like, oh, like are they really, like, is this really a place of kind of worship, and is God really like, or God really working in these places, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I think, like, with all that said, um, I think, like, it's hard to admit sometimes, but I think all of us fall in that category, um, like in one way or another, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just as Janie said in chat, like as Christians, we are still human beings. We
Mm.
are all fallible, and we are all like, we all make mistakes, and we all kind of like, yeah, like, make mistakes. Obviously, there are people, and like, I don't agree with these people, but obviously there's people who kind of put up a second kind of face in church. Like, they go to church all
Why are you
like,
calling me out,
nice.
Steve?
What are you?
What? Why are you
Oh,
asking me?
okay. Oh, I had to talk about this stuff. Okay. But yeah, like, there's people that, like, go to church to kind of show off, like how good they are, right? Like, at church they're like, oh, like, I'm such a good person. I come to church on time. I come to, like, I sit in the front row. I listen to what the pastors say. I worship out loud, etc., right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's and then, like, when they go back home, and where they we're not when they're not in a church setting, or not um with, like, church friends even, they act differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like, how they act uh also affects their friends as well, right? Like, if I was friends
Absolutely.
with someone there, and I'm like, oh, I thought you were like, let's say if I'm not Christian, like, and like they're acting like, a Christian friend of mine is acting like, I'd be like, oh, like, are you really Christian? Or like, why are you, if you're Christian, why are you doing all these things, right? And I think
That
it's a huge effect on the friends around you. And
absolutely.
like yes, it's kind of sad to see that in church, see, like, bullying, and see all those things in church. But I think at the same time, we all, like, as hard as it is to admit, like, we all fall in that category, right? Like, even things that we do, like, for example, like things that I choose to do, that
Mm-hmm.
not, like, to me necessarily, they don't sound kind of like weird, right? But then I think, like, to some of my friends, it might be seen as like, it might
Can
make them
you
doubt, right?
can you give an
Yeah.
example?
Yeah, for example, like something small, I would say, like, it's like, I really like to drink socially, right? Like, if I'm going to, like, a party, if I'm going to whatever, why are you making that face?
Oh,
If I'm
he
going to,
drinks Satan's juice?
Oh my
oh
gosh.
my
Are we
gosh,
diving into this topic?
oh
Are we gonna
no,
dive into are we
like
gonna dive into drinking?
if I go to a party, or if I'm hanging out with friends, I usually bring, like, unless I know I'm driving, then obviously not, but if I'm going to a party, I usually bring a drink, or I usually bring something alcoholic, and
Hmm.
like, I want to be able to drink with my friends, right? But then,
Yeah.
yeah, like,
I think there's a lot of like misconceptions out there on how, outsiders, okay, I don't want to say outsiders, like non-Christians think that Christians should behave. And when they don't see that because they have a misconception of, what,
yeah, and
yeah,
then,
then
yeah,
I
so,
see, I
like,
see,
they
yeah.
have a lot of people have a misconception of, like, social drinking, and what the rules around Christianity and drinking is, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
because they have that misconception, a lot of my friends are like, oh, like, you're a Christian, like, why do you drink so much? Why do you party, like drinking so much and stuff like that, right? And I think, like, yeah, like, as much as I'm like, like I don't think it's wrong, but as much as that, like, part of the reason why, like, a lot of, not a lot, but part of the reason why people have doubts, or like certain friends have doubts, it's because of that reason, right? Like because they see me do those things that they think Christians shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like,
And
as
and
much as
this
like
yeah.
I'm like, oh, like it's okay, like there are times where I'm like, oh, like it sucks that that's the situation, and it is hard to kind of, I guess, maneuver around that and to figure out what to, like, how to deal with that, right?
And if I could just jump in, that reminds me of that verse somewhere in the New Testament, somewhere Paul's letters where he says, you have your strong Christians, or sorry, you have those strong in the faith and weak in the faith, right? And obviously they don't actually mean like if you're strong or weak Christian or not, but we can
Yeah.
dive into whatever. But he's like, you have, two camps of Christians who believe different things. Like one believes eating meat sacrificed to an idol isn't a sin, one believes it is. And uh if to the person who doesn't believe it's a sin, it's not. To the person who believes it's a sin, if they were to do it, it is, right? And
Yeah.
I think what you said just now, Steve, kind of highlights that verse where um a lot of what like a lot of what people are witnessing, and it is based on like misconceptions on what isn't allowed. And if they were to believe, and I think Paul is very clear about this, if for example your friends were to believe like, oh, Christians should not drink, it's like it's against the Bible for Christians to drink, even though that's not actually true. I think we as Christians would have a duty to refrain from drinking so that they look at our conduct and they don't think that we're actively sinning against the God that we claim to serve. um
Yeah, I
we're
mean,
sorry.
like with the drinking topic, as well with which leads into like drugs and stuff like that too. Um,
Yeah.
like obviously people are like, oh, you shouldn't do drugs, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, as it like, and it's the idea. It's what's good for us as Christians is that does lead into a a chance to talk about what it actually is.
Hmm.
So for those that don't know, like what's widely known is that like they drank wine back in the day. Like when during the Last Supper, Jesus literally said, "This is my blood," and it was wine. Like
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
he didn't give grape juice back then. That wasn't a thing. It was wine, right? So it's like
Yeah.
Jesus provided alcohol, and same with turning water into wine. Like these are
Right.
prime examples. Like alcohol is not hidden inside the Bible. It's stated for a reason. You're
Yeah.
during a time of celebration. Yeah, feel free, drink. That's okay. That
Hmm.
like you're celebrating. They know that it's something that allows people to connect socially and fellowship.
Hmm.
That's the point.
And to
The
anyone,
limit.
yeah,
Sorry, yeah, you can
I
go.
was just gonna say, and to anyone in the chat who's, I think Tommy's speaking this because if anyone in the chat is thinking like, oh man, I can't take that nip of wine at Christmas because I think what Tommy's trying to say here is, feel free to take that nip of wine. God ain't mad at you. He still loves you. Like you're absolutely free to do so. But I think the point that I was trying to make was, if you do believe though that it is a sin to drink wine, and you think it is a sin for all Christians to drink wine, and you have other Christians who may think differently than you in your vicinity. So, for example, if Tommy were of, or if Tommy were of the belief that you shouldn't drink wine at Christmas, although clearly he's not of that camp, and I'm of the belief that you can, but when Tommy sees that conduct, he thinks it's a sin, and so if he were to see me complete that conduct, he would think I was sinning. It would be my duty, and I think Paul makes it clear, it would be my duty not to be like a stumbling block to him.
Mm.
And also with, also abstain. So if you, and I totally agree with you, Tommy, that it is a great, it's a great opportunity to have that discussion, about what the Bible actually says and who Christ actually is. I think it's a wonderful leeway. But I think in the meantime, if there are younger Christians, or Christians who've just started their walk, and they think, I remember I went through this when I first converted. I thought like everything that brought you pleasure was a
Well,
sin.
a sin, yeah,
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 I
big
reformed,
misconception.
right? Anything
It's
that brings you pleasure
it's
is a sin. Like I think it was really good that the older mentors around me would refrain from doing that in my presence, but then would also kind of gently break it to me like, hey, you have freedom in Christ. But I also do
well,
want to say though, real quick, just because as Steve was talking, it like triggered this story in my brain that I just have to get out about how so many Christians, and this leads other people to stumble, are two-faced. Because I remember, I will not name names, but there is this church that I used to go to occasionally, where one of the worship leaders, he was a worship leader, he was a small group leader, he was discipling other young men.
Mhm.
And one day, my friend comes crying to me saying that he took her out on a date as like a brother and sister in Christ hangout, and then they ended up doing the dance with no pants. Like they ended up committing
That's what-
fornication together. Sorry, I didn't know how to.
You know the word sex is not banned, right? You know
It's
you
not-
can
it's
say
not
the
not
word
banned.
sex.
Okay, then, I'm
Why would the word sex? No, yes, they had sex. Like what is
Pants with no pants. That's so sounds so much better.
like it is what it is, right?
Tommy, my ears! Ah! Do
Uh-huh.
not use saying aggressive
Continue your
words.
story. Continue your story.
But my point is, like, here's this guy who, like, the head pastor was like training him up to be a leader in the church. You know, he's charismatic. He's leading other young men in his ways, and here he is going around sleeping with the girls, taking them out on dates under innocent pretenses.
What I was talking about.
And then one thing leads to another, and suddenly, like, then I got my friend crying to me that he told her, oh my gosh, what he said was disgusting. He was like, I really like you, I really have feelings for you, I want to, like, pursue a relationship with you, and I want to pursue marriage with you, and, like, in the eyes of God, like, this is okay because I want to be committed to you. They had sex, and he ghosted her. He ghosted her, and I was like, damn. And I think what another thing that, like, leads to a lot of doubt in the church is we got eyes, we see this happening, but what we don't see happening is when these things happen, especially with people in positions of power in the church, they don't get accountability. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
Pastor
There
doesn't
needs to
say
be.
nothing. They don't say nothing. They don't release no public statement. There ain't no apology. There ain't no reconciliation. And I think that is a source of doubt. With this church, though, I will say, the girl was brave enough to reach out to the head pastor and told him about this, and he was immediately removed from all leadership positions. He was almost excommunicated from the church, and they basically, like, they punished him hard for that. And
Right.
I think he's actually doing better now. So
Well,
happy ending
yeah.
to that story. Happy ending to that story. But yeah, like, I think a huge reason why people get doubt is because they see people hurt. Like, people hurt them, people might even hurt them publicly and shame them and humiliate them in that way, but there is no justice. And if God is a God of justice, then why are his people unjust? Sorry, yes, Tommy, please.
Yeah, so that actually goes into a lot of different like, I guess, ideology. I don't think it's ideology is the word, but is it theology about your understanding of who God is and how God works. So for example, like, people say everything happens for a reason. It's like everything good or bad happens for a reason, and God is in control of that. And I say, no, that's not true. Everything doesn't happen for a reason. God isn't in control of the bad stuff. He doesn't force you to suffer for no reason at all. Like, it's like, oh, I want a natural disaster. Like, for example, the earthquake in Haiti years back. It's like, God's like, yeah, I'm going to kill these people right now, and I'm going to do good out of that. It's like, he doesn't. I firmly don't believe that God's literally just saying, I'm going to make a natural, like, disaster happen, murder people, and make good come out of that. It's like, I think how God works is that when Satan does bad things, he will find a way to make good from those bad. Like, there's so some people may not agree with me. Some may, some may be on the side of.
I disagree with you, but that's okay.
But that's that's okay. But what happens with that, though, and why I'm saying that is because the issue that stems from it is when something bad happens, like you were saying, right? And saying that, for example, everything happens for a reason, that's unfair to the victim. Number one, that's very unfair to the victim. And second,
I can see that.
right? And second, what comes out, it's like you can't say, oh, you got raped or you had sex with someone and got used for a reason. God's gonna do good out of that. I'm like, no, you're an asshole for saying that. That's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
God didn't do that, right? God clearly didn't do that. That's not God. That's Satan. That's sin. If you're saying sin is from God, then that's not true, right? So that's the issue there. But second, what comes out of it is that person now has all reason to think that all Christians are like this, and that's what stems out. That's the second part. And so what happens here is, for example, what's happening in Canada, since we are Canadian, the residential schools and graves of children that are being found that were never accounted for, the Native Americans or Indigenous peoples of Canada have every reason to hate every Christian or Catholic person in this country. Every reason to do so, right? And we know that, and we can argue as Christians as much as we want. Hey, not all Christians are like that. Obviously, everyone says that. It's like, oh, just because there's one bad apple doesn't mean the group is all bad, right? But the fact of the matter is, in the eyes of a victim, you can't argue that it's not like that. Because what I firmly believe in is, it doesn't matter how good your intentions are. If the party that receives it views it as bad, then you're an asshole, and you can't change that. Right? No matter how good your intention is. That's how villains work. That's how villains become things in stories. They have the best intentions, but the party says what you're doing is wrong, and so they're the villain. That's the title of villain. That's how it works. And so for us Christians within Canada as well, there's so much doubts in faith, right? And that there's so much like disagreement and fight against Catholicism and Christianity from the Indigenous people is justified. We've done them wrong, and we can't say we haven't, right? And that's why we have this whole thing about we need to boycott the Canadian flag now. Like, Canada's nuts, people. If you're in America, Canada's not in a good spot right now with our Canadian flag and things being in question. But like, it stems from that idea where we can't, like, we have to be mindful of everybody, and the reason why their doubts happen and they can't trust us Christians is because their suffering is real, and they are projecting that, and they rightfully so can project that to others. And that's why, like, for example, our church goes to First Nations missions, is because we want to rebuild that relationship and then prove through action, not just words, right, that we are not the same. That's not what God stands for, and that's what we want to show. And I think that's really hard. Like you guys were both saying, like, that just because of how non-Christians, people who say they're Christians, people who wear a mask, right, portray themselves, they are the loud voice. They're the forefront. And so everyone who views that is going to be like, now all Christians are assholes. Those are the people that leave churches and never come back, right? It's hard. It sucks. It's such a hard situation to be in as because you're like, oh frig, that's a person that suffered and I wasn't there to help them, right? And it's hard. As a Christian, it's really hard.
I think the sovereignty of God is a topic and a half that would take us hours. If I may share my perspective super quickly. Super quickly. And then Steve, I would also like to hear, your thoughts on everything that we're saying. I agree with you when you say, oh, like, it's all in God's plan. You were just horribly violated. Or a family member of yours has died, or another tragedy has happened to you. Yeah, this horrible thing has happened to you, but you know what? It's all part of God's plan, And I think that is very disheartening to the victim. I agree with you there. It's just like, why would you say that? Just comfort. Mourn with those who mourn. Rejoice with those who rejoice. And I think that's what you're trying to get at there, and we Christians do that enough. But I would argue from a theological standpoint, though, that if that horrible situation were not in God's control, and again, this is just my opinion. Chat, if you disagree or agree, feel free to share your opinions. We can, share them on the podcast. I'm of the opinion that if that were outside of the control of God, we would have way more to worry about. I think God also, like, I think God orchestrates both the good and the bad. And the reason why I say this is because, like, logically, if God were only capable of orchestrating the good that were to happen, and he's incapable of having control over the bad, uh, um, then that would mean that there is a possibility that there may be some bad out there that God is incapable of handling, if that makes any sense. And I remember this quote, this John MacArthur quote, where like, if there's a single molecule outside of the control of God, then this is not a God that can be trusted. So I'm of that camp, but um I think why a lot of people have doubt, like they get doubt with this doctrine is because they think, like, okay, well, if God would orchestrate this terrible thing that happened in my life, how good can a God really be? Like, if you were to like conspire to murder somebody, that's a crime in Canada, right? But um, with God, like, if he were to orchestrate something terrible in my life, like, what does that say about God? I think that's where a lot of doubt comes from.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And so like the idea here is for me, and the way I see that, it's like God's in control. We're not saying God's not, and I'm not saying God's not, but He's not gonna willingly make someone suffer. Is my point. I don't think that's
I
who our
I would
God
agree
is.
with you that
Yeah,
I would agree with you that God would not make someone suffer for kicks.
yeah,
He would
exactly, and
not be
that's
like,
that's the thing.
yeah. He does not
And
enjoy watching pain for the sake of making people hurt.
yeah, and so that's where like the slight difference between what our thoughts are here is just that for me it's like the act of suffering is not from God, but what comes out of it is from God is what I'm trying to say. So that if that words it a little bit better.
Okay,
So
I can see that.
so it's
Mhm.
because like that or else why would He save us, right? And that's the
I can
whole
see
thing
that.
of free will, right? We have free will because we can choose to do good or we can choose to do bad. He can force us to follow Him, but that's not how our God works, right? And so our God is giving us the free will to choose Him because that means more than for Him to force us into authority, right? A position of authority. And that's why we say that we have a personal relationship with Him. It's the understanding that He wants us to choose Him and Him to choose us, which He already
Mhm,
has. It's just we have to make that second step. So, um, and so that's where kind of like my viewpoint kind of grows from, and
mhm.
that idea. And I saw a question. Sorry, Emmy. I saw your question earlier, which is going to your story actually, which was what is better to is it better to excommunicate or to teach that person that did wrong? So if you were to go, so going back to your story, I guess would be like, would you agree that the church excommunicated, and would you agree that that was the right decision overall?
I think excommunication would have been appropriate if he was consistently unrepentant. Like, if he was just like, I don't really care. Like, I don't really think I did anything wrong. I think that is caused for. I think scripturally that is cause for excommunication. There's that verse where, like, if you see your brother do wrong, approach him approach him yourself and try to convince him to not. And if he still doesn't listen to you, bring another brother into it. Bring two or three. If he doesn't listen to you, then get elders involved. And if he doesn't listen to you, then remove him from your presence, because there's a verse like that out there. I know,
Yeah,
I
no.
know,
I know which verse you're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, I do.
Um, so I think excommunication is only acceptable if there is unrepentant sin involved. I
Correct.
think
Yes.
rehabilitation and reconciliation should definitely be your go-to steps.
Yeah. And I
Hmm.
think that's what people of power are missing, right? It's like when you have power, I will say I've been in a position of power and I've abused it before. Not severely to the point where I'm like I'm king, but like where I'm like if you're doing something wrong to me, then you don't belong here, and I'll just cut them out, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And like as I grew older and I understanding like as a teacher and going through these situations, it's like that's never the answer. Just cutting them out right away, like helping them
Hmm.
grow is the answer. And so
Absolutely.
yeah, it's hard. That line is hard because emotion speaks louder than logic all the time.
Hmm.
Like we are
Hmm.
people of emotion. We're
It's
humans of
felt
emotion.
more for sure. It's felt more.
Yeah.
Um, which come this is gonna be like kind of a sharp turn to the next topic. But before we do, Steve, is there anything that you wanted to speak to about, Christians hurting other Christians and that leading to doubt? Is there anything that you wanted to say to that before we switch gears?
Yeah, just quickly something to add. I think like you two brought up very good points around like the kind of the phrase of like everything happens for a reason, and you two definitely brought up like good points from both sides of um like I know you two are kind of in disagreement, but I think both sides have good arguments around what like what the phrase "everything happens for a reason" means.
Yeah.
And then yeah, like there's a lot that we can discuss about that, but just for time's sake, I'm gonna move on. But just to answer kind of quickly a little bit about Sarah's question, like if or just to kind of have my thought about it, like if God is
Hmm.
good, then why does bad things happen?
Mm-hmm.
And touching back upon the phrase of like um everything happens for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, like I lean towards Tommy's side of um everything happens for a reason is not in terms of like it doesn't for me it doesn't really mean that like everything just like how literal we take it of like it means that like everything good or bad happens for a reason, right? I think for me it means that um like god God will in Romans 8:28, I think it says, we know that all things God work for the good and for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that uh, essentially for that, like it's sort of kind of uh, like relates to the quote, everything happens for a reason, but at the same time, it is a different in terms of I think what kind of it tells us or what it teaches us is that um, we as believers should have peace and confidence, um, knowing that all things happen. Um, whatever things happen, God will work things together for our good. Um, whether
So
that situation is good or bad,
right.
God
Hmm.
will use that situation um, to work in our lives to good. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
I think with that statement there comes a whole lot of um again, I'm not speaking to whether or not everything
yeah,
happens for
of
a reason
course.
is true or not. Because I don't know, but
Mhm,
I and just thinking back to my own faith, when that was told to me, everything
mhm,
happens for a reason. I would cling to it like, oh, it must happen for a reason. But then with that came the
mhm,
assumption that that reason would eventually be revealed to me. So I think another source of doubt for a lot of Christians is they think that they're gonna learn everything in time, like, oh, why did
Oh,
I lose my baby, or
yeah. Mhm,
why did I get this divorce, or why did he cheat on me? I think we when we're told everything happens for a reason, that may or may not be true. I'm
mhm,
of the camp that it is true, but we also think that when we hear these words anyway, that that reason will be revealed to us, and then at the end we're gonna be like, oh, that's why it happened. And I think this happens a lot because every time we have, like faith check-ins or like prayer meetings, it's like, yeah, I recently learned that like, like, when I failed my math test the other day, like I learned that the reason is because God wanted to teach me patience, or like God wanted to, like, we hear those phrases a lot, like,
mhm.
I learned that like this is like
Yeah,
this happened for a reason. I learned that I, got dumped because of this reason. And it's great that you've discovered a reason, but I think
yeah.
a lot of people are going to live and die never discovering that reason. Maybe they'll
Yeah, for
discover it on
sure.
the other side of heaven. I don't
Yeah.
know. But I think to avoid the assumption that like God has promised us reasons for our suffering, because even Job never really got a reason why he was suffering, right? He kind of just like got the short end of the stick, and then he never really found out, but he ended up worshiping. He continued worshiping God anyway. Great ending to that story. So for those of you out there in the chat who may be going through something right now and you're really wondering like why is this happening to me, what did I do, I would just like to encourage you that there is probably a reason for it, because God doesn't make people suffer for kicks. But whether or not you ever find out that reason, God remains good. You may never find out that reason, you may be wondering about it for the rest of your life, but God remains good. Would you guys agree with that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for
For
sure.
sure.
Yeah.
But like stemming from that with like not understanding why, there's a whole thing like you mentioned before, like not hearing God's voice and not being able to communicate with God, that prayer doesn't seem like a
Great segue to the
conversation.
next segment, by the way, but please
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, so the idea here is like if we as Christians believe that God is all powerful, right? Then
Mhm.
he has no reason to share with us what his plans are for us. That is fact. There is no reason that he has to. There's no like, oh, God is always going to tell you. Like there's like and same thing with hearing, like he's not going to always say yes. He's not going to like there's no definite answer from God, right? Like that,
Mhm.
if we believe that he is all powerful, then he can do what he wants and he can choose what he wants to say, and do what he wants. That's what it means. And so I think people fall into this really big trap of I thought this is what God wanted me to do, and I'm like, no, that might have been just you. That's your voice, not his voice. So that whole idea of like your subconscious voice and taking that as God's voice is a huge issue, and it's hard to distinguish that voice, because obviously ourselves, it's like when God's like, oh yeah, take that, like if you're thinking of a job and God's telling you to take that job, you're like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted anyways. But then it's like God was actually saying, go into ministry, yo, go to ministry. No, don't take this job. And then, but your subconscious voice is like, oh, dude, this job pays so well. It's gonna do so good for you. Obviously,
Oh
you should take
my
it. And you take that as
gosh.
God's voice. Then obviously, like you don't know that. You can't tell that because that, like, what? How are you gonna know? Right?
That's a
You can't
hot
know.
take that I wish
Uh,
some of the charismatics in my church. Sorry, not to call it charismatics. A lot of charismatics, beautiful people,
Charismatic
beautiful,
man.
love their passion for God. But that is something that I would like to. I wish more people understood. Is that sometimes uh we hear the voice of God wrong, and
Oh
I
yeah,
also
been
think
there, done that
and I also
multiple
think there's
times.
also um yeah, call me John D says it's hard to hear God's voice when you're already determined what he's gonna say.
Oh
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
That is
that's
very
it.
true.
That
I agree with that.
I heard no lie. I heard no lie.
Yeah.
But and again, this could be another podcast topic because we are running a bit of a bit late. But I think a lot of the times Christians over spiritualize decision making, in that we think like, oh, what job does God want me to take? I have two great options. Which one does he want me to take? Or who should I marry? Or who should like which ministry should I go into? Like, I feel like Christians over spiritualize this a lot, where they look for some sort of sign from God, like, Lord, if you want me to become a lawyer, please like open the heavens for me and make it rain tomorrow. Or Lord, if you want me to marry this girl and not this girl, please cast a shadow on the ground in the shape of a V, and I will. That will be my confirmation. I remember praying these things a lot myself, but I think
Has to be a
God
V.
Has to be
must
a
be a
V.
V, and it must be shaped like a cross, and I will know. But
Oh
I
gosh.
think like I think a lot of doubt comes from us making decisions that we think is from God, and then things take a turn, as things do in life, because things just happen, and then we
Yeah.
get a lot of doubt and we think like, oh, like, did God mislead me? When in reality, I think God gives us a lot of Christian freedom to make many of these decisions ourselves, and we think like God was the one directing us, when in reality it could have just been us really wanting something
Yeah.
and wanting God to affirm that, which nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah.
anyways,
That's free will. That's free will. That's what it
mhm.
is.
to kind of segue into the next topic really quickly, and I don't know if we're gonna have time for. You know what? We'll make time. We'll make time because I think deconstruction is very important.
Okay.
But not okay. Do you guys want to talk about not experiencing God as a source of doubt, or do you guys want to just dive into
Hey, you
deconstruction?
decide. I'll leave it up to you. You're the leader of this one. I'll leave
Okay.
it up to you, Ashley.
Okay. Then I want to say something super quick about not experiencing God, just because I'm kind of in that boat as we speak, in that I haven't really experienced the presence of God, and that's causing like a lot of doubt in my mind, a lot,
Mm.
about whether or not I'm a Christian. But if I want to just say this really quick thing, if you are somebody in the chat who is doubting if God is real or if God loves you because you haven't, had those warm, bubbly feelings towards God for a long time, I want to reassure you that your salvation is not based on how warm and loving you feel towards God or other people. It's not based on how you feel. If you have faith in Christ, you are a Christian. And that's the end of the story. That's the end of the story. Okay. Deconstruction. Let's go. Who here knows what deconstruction is?
For the people that don't know, why don't you explain anyways?
Yeah, let me explain to you my understanding of what deconstruction is. And people in the chat, if I got it wrong, please feel free to correct me. From my understanding, deconstruction is when when you deconstructed coffee, when you take apart something. So deconstruction of your faith would be taking apart your faith and analyzing each individual piece. And yeah, that's how I understand it. It's like when you take what you believe, like your beliefs and your faith, and what you take it apart and you analyze each individual part to see where your faults lie. And there is a huge controversy with the deconstruction movement because it has led a lot of people, especially in the United States, to become atheists, essentially. It has caused deconstructing their faith has led a lot of people to lose it entirely. And so, I don't know, are you too familiar with the topic of deconstruction?
Am I familiar with it? I don't think I've dived into it specifically as like a topic on itself. Have I witnessed it or have I kind of talked about it? I'm pretty sure I have. I don't think I've ever used the term deconstruction to talk about it. But I have done the whole thing of like breaking down little like bits and pieces of what we believe in and so on and so forth. So I do know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Steve, how about you?
Taking a course on it.
You've taken a course on it.
I have during my MDiv.
Oh, fun
Stephen
fact,
be a smart
guys.
boy.
Steve
Stephen a
has
smart
an
boy.
MDiv, a Master's of Divinity. He has transcended. So, would you mind sharing with us?
Transcended. He's transcended.
Transcended.
No.
Would you mind sharing with us, Steve, a little bit of what you understand about deconstruction?
Sure. No.
He's just pulling up his deconstruction notes and like.
No. I'm just gonna keep it simple. Like I agree with what Ashley said or how she defined it. It's kind of like taking apart your faith and examining it. But I think well, I'm pretty sure this is from somewhere. I don't know who says this. My prof quoted it, but I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it's his own quote, but he says essentially deconstruction, is deconstructing faith is it's examining your faith from the inside and looking for potential weaknesses. So essentially, it's like an analogy is like it's so let's say you're setting a sail on a cruise ship, right? And you see it at the harbor, and people are applying a fresh coat of paint and sealing any gaps and dealing with all the rust. And it's being done so that it doesn't sink once you go out to sea, right? So it's essentially the same thing, like how it's related to faith. Of it's taking ownership of what you believe and potentially diving deeper and letting go of things that no longer work for you. It's taking ownership of your own faith and looking at the places that are at your weakest and taking those places and letting them go. Um, that's kind of my idea of what deconstruction faith means. Um, like diving deeper into those places that are weaknesses in your faith and having like those places that like you fall short and seeing if uh, there's things that you need to let go and things that you need to let God take over control for. Yeah.
And I think deconstruction has been highly stigmatized by the Christian community um because a lot of people have become atheists from it, because admittedly they take apart their faith, they
Mm-hmm.
they examine it, they notice bad beliefs that they
Yeah.
have, and they're like, you know what, instead of because what Steve described, kind of how I pictured it was, you take a pizza or whatever, or you take it apart, you sift out all the bad nuts. Why did I say pizza? Just
You
nuts.
said nuts. You said pizza, and then you went to
Yeah,
nuts, and I was
I
like,
did. I did. It was
So
like,
close. So close.
anyway, you have a bag of nuts, right? And you sift through. So, the way Steve described it, you sift through all the bad nuts, you pick out all the bad ones, and then you put the nuts back together. And that's kind of taking ownership. Like, this is my belief system. But I think what a lot of people forget to do, and why you have a lot of atheists coming out of the woodwork from this deconstruction movement, is because you pick up the bad nuts and then you chuck the whole bag of nuts away because you found a few bad nuts in there. So my question for you two now is, how how and chat, if you have an answer, please also feel free to share. How would you reconstruct your faith after deconstructing it? How would you put the good nuts back together again?
um, that's a good question. Or I guess that's a deep dive into our own faiths, I guess. Because like you mentioned, how I was breaking down my faith, like once again with the whole science thing, um, is trying to figure out, um, like if we say that God is predictable, then that's not our God. Like we can't say God is predictable. Like we said, like we were talking about earlier, God is all powerful. We can't know what God is doing. Only God knows what God's doing. And so science is essentially trying to prove and see how God works, but there are still certain things that science cannot prove to 100% thing, which is what everyone gets angry about with the weather, like we were saying. But like I think for me, with deconstructing faith, it's like, I guess for me as a person, if I find something that's wrong, I don't just throw it out. I find a way to understand it, and and that mentality is not easy.
Mm.
So a good way to put it is like, there's a reason why we lose hundreds and thousands of students, high school students, once they go into university. The retention rate for like Christian faith once they go into university is like astonishingly low. Like it's very,
Yeah,
if
it's
you've
like
analyzed your own churches,
75%. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's low. Like we lose so many Christians just from when they are now adults, and a part of that as well. And I agree with this, and this is what that our church is personally doing to kind of help this situation, is the understanding, like the way their faith is built up is, once again, they're forced, or there's not force fed but spoon fed the information. Still, obviously it's a little more than like Sunday school. It's a little more than
Mhm.
Sunday school. Obviously they can still make their own decisions and stuff, and like retreats go into like deeper dives into certain topics and stuff like that, but they're never challenged about their faith. I don't think
And
they're ever challenged in particular, and ever told to like truly live out. their faith, because they're not adults. They've never had a
Mhm.
reason to do so. Like they've always, if they go to church, then they grow up in the church, and they don't experience the some may not experience the harsher parts of life. Some may just not feel the need to be challenged about their faith, and because they grow up in this community, they feel welcomed and motivated to grow in the faith. And then comes university. Hey, you don't have to come to church every week anymore. Now everything's in your hands. What are you going to do? We lose them because there's nothing that like keeps them
Absolutely.
held on. And once they figure out and they deconstruct their own faith, like they're like, why did I go to church? What's the point?
And I love that you brought this up, because I think you're absolutely right. It's the spoon feeding that we do. It's, loved it so much that I even put it in the chat. But I was reading this book, and amazing book. Oh, I should have brought it. I don't have it. It's called something Faith and Doubt. I don't know. It's by this guy named AJ Swoboda, and he is basically one of the leading biblical authors on doubt. He started this. He is like one of the go-to people you
After
want.
Doubt?
Say, sorry.
After Doubt?
After Doubt. That's the book. After Doubt by AJ Swoboda. And in that book, he describes that every Christian who survives being a Christian has 3 stages to their faith. The first stage is blind faith. So I think that's what Tommy was getting at, was the spoon feeding. You just believe what the pastors tell you. You believe what your parents tell you about Jesus. Like you just consume. Oh, I hit myself. You just consume what it is that you learn, and you hold on to it. You don't really analyze it. You don't really think about it. And there are pros and cons to this stage, because pros is you can blindly accept good parts, like a love for scripture, a sense of community, a dedication to God, knowing that you ought to obey God. Like these are things that you can take in that are good to kind of blindly believe in. But when you easily take in good beliefs, you also easily take in bad beliefs from your community. And that might be the way you treat women, which is a huge problem that I see in the church also. It might be give me another one, give me etc. That was or yeah, being told to just pray on something, being told a prayer can answer everything or can solve everything. Some bad beliefs, like maybe even a bit of prosperity gospel slips in there, like, oh, if you just pray enough, you can get exactly what you want. Some of these, you also inherit these bad beliefs. So that's stage 1, is blind faith. And then stage 2 is deconstruction, and every Christian will go through deconstruction, where they realize, hey, wait a minute, actually, when I donate $100 to the church and pray for 7 days, I actually don't get what I want. Wait a minute. And that's when the taking apart and analyzing which part is true, which part isn't, that's where that comes into play. And that's where we lose a lot of Christians, because from high school to university, from childhood to high school, you are basically encouraged to maintain this blind faith. You're spoon-fed what you're supposed to know, what you're supposed to believe in, and which is has some pros, because you do get like a solid foundation. But we don't teach kids how to deconstruct, or actually on top of that, we don't teach high schoolers how to reconstruct their faith, how to seek the truth, how to critically think. And when they get to university, and there are bound to be people in university who think quicker than you, who have studied this harder than you, who know more about the Bible than you do, and encourage you to go down this path of secularism, or are not believing anymore. Obviously, if you have never learned to critically analyze your own faith and put your own faith back together again, you're going to lose it. And that's why a crazy, like 75% of high schoolers who claim they were Christians end university claiming they're not. And that's kind of, that's a freaky deaky statistic. And the third stage, reconstruction, I think, is one that the church doesn't talk about nearly enough. And there's a comment here. There's a comment here by John. It says, as a youth leader, Tommy was bang on. We owe it to the next generation to better prepare them. High schoolers, as it is, are taught to critically think before they even get to us. It is such a disservice that we think otherwise. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Anybody else? Like, that's why I wanted to discuss more, like how to reconstruct. Because honestly, I haven't gotten to that part of the book yet. I'm still figuring it out. How would you reconstruct your faith?
Steven, you got anything?
Yeah, I do. I guess I could give you like what
Give us
I
your
learned, what I,
course content.
my course content. Just pull up my course right now. No, kidding. But um, yeah, I think um, yeah, I think I'll touch upon reconstruction instead of just the first part, deconstruction. But
Mm-hmm.
in terms of answering Ashley's question of how to reconstruct, there are a couple things that I want to kind of touch upon quickly. I won't go into details of every single one, but um, I'll just touch upon like kind of couple of small things that we could do like organically or not organically, like realistically. Um, so the first thing is definitely rest. Um, take a break, right? Like when after you deconstruct so many things, um, know that it's okay to take a break and to just rest, to think about those things, to think about why you deconstructed those things, why you let certain things go, why you felt like God was calling you to let go of certain things. It's okay to be superficial, right? It's okay to uh, not be like guilt tripping yourself of like, oh, like should I have let that go, or like what if I shouldn't have let that go, stuff like that, right? Like just take a break, take a breather. Um, I don't know, like sleep it off, read some books. That like it's okay to not be constantly thinking about those things related to the deconstruction process. It's okay to not be constantly thinking about like your faith, essentially. And what I mean by that is like, let's say for example, I don't know, you deconstructed a part of your faith and you threw that out, right? Like, yeah, like as Janie said, like don't forget you're human. You bleed and have feelings. You need time to rest. It's okay to, I don't know, to read something, read a book that has nothing to do with God. It's okay to watch TV that's not related to Christianity and not related to like that topic. It's okay to like to yeah, take a break and take a breather and not jump back into construction like immediately.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to rebuild and take the time to rebuild, right? Like God's not telling you to like God's not saying that like as soon as you deconstruct something you have to reconstruct it immediately or you have to
Mm-hmm.
reconstruct your faith immediately.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like take as long as you need to rebuild your faith together. um like there's no rush. Like at the same time, obviously don't like find excuses not to do it, but like there's also no rush in doing it, right? And I think a second thing is uh don't let fear stop you from doing it, right? Like I know like there's many people who are very scared of what it looks like to like deconstruct something or what it looks like to construct something. And a lot of the time, fear is a huge factor of why they choose not to. This falls on deconstruction as well, right? They, out of fear, they choose not to deconstruct that problem because they're afraid of what their church might say or their friends might say or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you really believe that it's something that's harming you and that's hurting your faith, then like don't be afraid to take it apart. Don't be afraid to dive deeper into that problem of
Mm-hmm.
like why you feel like that's a problem or why God's saying that's a problem, and don't be
Mm-hmm.
afraid to do it, right? And that's with the reconstruction process as well, right? If there's something that when you're reconstructing your faith or when you're reconstructing part of your faith, if there's something that uh, you're scared to do, but you truly believe that God is saying that this is good for you, then do it, right? Don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid what other people say if you do end up doing it, right?
So my question now is, and I know there's probably like a third point, and we will
Yeah.
definitely get to that. I just want to quickly ask, what happens if you know are in the process of reconstruction? You've given
Mhm.
yourself that break. Now you're diving into your beliefs. You're picking them apart. You are, you know, investigating, and you don't find a satisfactory answer. What do you do?
Oh,
Is
like
there
you
anything
don't.
to do?
So in that, so I think that's where like we were talking about earlier about having like these students disappear from the Christian faith is the idea that there is no support for them, or they feel like there's no support. Not that there isn't. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not saying churches don't have support,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Obviously the pastors are doing their best to do what they can. Churches, like,
Mhm.
that's the whole point. But the fact of the matter is some of these students and some of these people might not feel like that support is there. And so I feel like, at least from the Korean like churches here in Toronto that I've
Mhm.
experienced, the older generation, they do things like small groups and stuff like that. Like my mom goes to like small groups and they do a little thing. But I'm like, but that's not the same as like discipleship. So I think a lot of the current generation of like English ministry Christians within Korean churches, started to um what they've started to do more is focus on discipleship, because discipleship is the focus of, hey, this is a personal time between your discipler and your disciple, to talk
Mhm.
about Christian faith, to deconstruct it and literally start from some programs start from the ground up, like literally the
Mhm.
foundations, and some might start in the middle and actually challenge you with your current faith as it is, right? And so
Mhm.
it gives this space and it helps develop a relationship with the discipler and disciplee. And I'm all for that. Like that whole idea of having this setup and showing them that, hey, people are here for you. Like the church members are here for you. And
Mm.
sometimes it just has to be one member, right? And just even having that might be something, because I know back in the day, like, sure, you can go to a pastor, but it's not comfortable going to a pastor. And I can confidently say that I would not go to any of the older members of my church to talk about my faith. If I were to
Oh,
go back in time to like
interesting.
great like high school, I would not talk to a single person that's older than me about my faith. I know I
Really?
wouldn't be comfortable doing so. Other than my pastor, I would not do it. There are
Is
Yeah.
there
like, it's just there's no reason for me to talk about my faith with those people other than in church setting, like at a retreat, for example. You go to an everyday regular setting, I'd meet for like a cup of coffee, I won't talk to you about my faith. Hell no. Right? I just wasn't comfortable. There was never that environment. And that's fact. And that, if that's for me, for someone who's grown in the church, how
yeah.
much worse would it be for someone who's new to the faith? Right? When they do have those doubts that are strong, then, and they don't have the people that they feel are comfortable to talk about this, whatever it might be, whatever the fears might be that Stephen was talking about, it's only a matter of time that they leave, right?
Interesting. That has admittedly not been my experience. Well, you know, I maybe one or two older people I wouldn't go to anymore, but for
Right.
the most part, you know, older people were quite a valuable resource for me. So I'm very, you know, I'm kind of like very interested that you would not like you would go back in time and not do those things. Is there a
By
like did they
old, by older, how old are you thinking? How much older are you thinking?
well on average the mentors that were they're like 5 to 8 years older than me.
Yeah, yeah, no, I wouldn't talk to them. People who are like 5 to 8
Interesting.
years older than me, no, definitely not. Unless they were a pastor or something,
Mhm.
or of a position within the church, I would not talk to them about my faith. I would not have felt comfortable.
Is there a reason why? If you don't mind me asking?
If I had to boil it down, it's just there was, like I said, there was never a situation or an environment that was created outside of church that allowed me to talk about my faith. So what do I do outside of church? I go to school, I talk to my school friends, and that's it. So when I'm in a
Okay.
church setting, sure, I'll talk about my faith because we're supposed to. That's what it's about.
Uh-huh.
But then once you're outside of church and you're going on a regular school basis, like what makes fellowship with Christians different from fellowship with your friends? For most people, it doesn't. You're just hanging out with friends.
And that's what you would have preferred it to be if it was if sharing about your faith was more like is that what you mean?
It's like I would like if there was a situation like if I had a chance to do discipleship back in the day, at
Mm-hmm.
least then I would have at least one person that I can confide in whenever I had issues or problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I had a question, I could trust that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a
Mm.
pastor. They don't have to be a pastor, right? Um,
I
yeah,
find
so
it
that's kind of our
very,
situation.
yeah. I find it very interesting that you bring up this idea of comfort with who it is that you are talking about your faith to, because I feel like, and I've experienced this where you tell a pastor or you tell an older person that you are in the process of deconstructing something, or you have doubts about this thing, you aren't so sure about this verse, or etc. And rather than walking alongside with you through the deconstruction, they kind of just like, oh, here's the answer, and if you don't believe it, then you must not be faithful. Or like, is there's that again, that stigma with deconstruction where if you're going through it, you must not be a faithful Christian, you must have sin in your life. And I can see how that could, for me anyway, lead a person to complete like walk away from the faith
Oh,
entirely.
for sure.
You're not allowed to ask those questions, you're not allowed to challenge and be like, well, what about this? And if you're not allowed to do those things without having your identity as a Christian questioned, um, then of course you're just not gonna keep your identity in Christ.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
So Janie asked you both a very interesting question, which is, um, have you guys deconstructed your faith or reconstructed?
Well, I mean, I've definitely gone through it. Well, not in like
Yeah,
a deep level, but I've definitely like questioned it and found answers myself. So I think
yeah.
it's more so on Steven's side.
And Steve, since you took a course in it, I mean,
Yeah, I've definitely deconstructed faith um, before, and I've definitely spent the time to go through all these go through the process of deconstruction as well as reconstruction um, of my faith. Yeah.
so Janie, I hope
Which
that answers your question. And
so
Polka
what
Dot Swing
was yeah.
here
Oh,
says, wait, my pastor said that to me. And I'm assuming she is talking about when I said, a lot of pastors will be like, oh, if you were in the process of deconstruction, you're not being faithful. Um, what are your thoughts? What are both of your thoughts on that statement or that sentiment?
like
Of
wait.
what?
The sentiment that if you were deconstructing your faith, you were not being faithful or you
That's
were
wrong.
abandoning your faith.
That's
Hmm.
$100 wrong.
That's completely wrong.
Yeah, I don't think anyone anyone with a right mind would agree with that statement because a healthy like the whole point that we're talking about doubts and faith is that a healthy faith should have doubts as you're growing. Like that should be a normal thing. That's what science is. You know what I mean? Like I'm always gonna link back to science because I'm a man of science. But like when how theories and things are developed, right? The idea of theories is that you hypothesize, you figure out the answer to that hypothesis by observation, and you come to a
Hmm.
conclusion. Why can't you do that with faith? What stops you from doing that? If that's called the scientific method and that's logical, right? Why can't you do that with your faith? That is completely allowed. If you are going through your faith, right? And you are saying that and you have a question about it that wasn't answered for you particularly yet, then you have all the right reason to go researching and searching and asking questions until that question is answered. That's completely fine. That's a normal thing
Absolutely.
to do. But we like Polka Dot Swing is saying, it's like it some for some people it's like that's some people are told that that's not a good thing, and it's like, why not?
Yeah.
Like
And
it's
a
completely okay.
sentiment that I've seen a lot is equating deconstruction to atheism. Um, and that's not, I think that's a huge misconception
It
that
is.
Christians have,
It
that
is.
and it's not. I think it can lead to atheism, absolutely. I think anytime you take apart anything, it can lead to
That's
keeping
like
that thing
saying, yeah,
deconstructed.
that's like saying relativity is not science because it broke apart physics. It's like,
Yeah.
no, it doesn't
I'm
work.
dead. Let's not go into relativity today. That's a two
I'm
can of
just
worms and a
saying.
half.
I'm just saying. Right? The physics of light is not the physics on Earth, and it's like, okay, so they
All
created a
right.
whole different topic. So you're saying that's not science? No, it's not true. Exactly.
But
That
if
things change.
we encourage scientists to deconstruct their evidence, I see the fear that Christians have with deconstructing their faith, because what if they find something that they can never reconcile, that they are never find the answer to? What happens then? And I think there's a misconception where people assume that when you do find something that you can't reconcile, that you can't quite piece together, you have an obligation to walk away. I think that's what a lot of people think. And the reason why I say this is because, like, for example, um something that I was never really able to reconcile was how um the head of, like, that verse is like the head of the wife is the husband, and in the same way that the head of the church is Christ, and therefore, the husband has authority over the wife, and wife has authority over the husband, but the husband is the head, right? And something that I've tried to deconstruct and could never find an answer to was why it was that way. I understand why there needs to be a hierarchy. I was just, why does it have to be like the men? Just because I've seen so many marriages break down. I've seen so many relationships, so many books being written, so many people sharing how hurt they were because men abuse that position of power. And uh, I think there's a notion out there where that if you encounter something like that you can't reconcile, then
Let
you
me.
have.
I have something to share with you then. So to answer
Nice.
that, that goes actually go back to what I learned. We talked about in our small group, which is Proverbs 31, 10 to 31.
Okay.
JD's in my small group, so she knows it. So
I
I'll just read
mean,
this out. This should help you out. I mean, just kind of going on that topic. Like it's when you have those kind of difficulties. For some, they would walk away. For some, they'll find an answer. For some, they'll find a support to answer that question. And for me, like
mhm.
I guess luckily I remembered this and I can help you with this and kind of help you with it. And for some, sometimes they just have to remember that faith is about not knowing.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
the definition of faith. You
Mhm.
believe in what you cannot see. That's literally what it says. So
Mhm.
sometimes you won't find an answer, but it's up to you if you truly believe in it. If it breaks your ideology,
Mhm.
can you trust it? Can you believe
Mhm.
that? And that's hard. That's challenging. But to kind of answer your thing here, Proverbs 31, 10 to 31, I'm just gonna kind of um, bring it out to you. It's like it starts off with a wife of noble character who can find. She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects, and then I'll kind of go through, and then into verse 25. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. So the Bible, like I from what I get from this is the understanding that like to trust in the Lord, well, like, and I think it's like, yes, there is a hierarchy to it, but at the end of the day, sure, I think that's more so on the construct of like, in history the man was the 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 head of the household. That's why the analogy is there, but also that it clearly puts into perspective that women are not weak.
Mhm.
Women are
Mhm.
not weak at all. Like to do all of this is to be praised. To do this for God and to fear God is what is the redeeming quality of a person. Everything else is fleeting. Everything else doesn't matter, right? She can be pretty. So what? If she doesn't love the Lord, then do you really want to be with her? No. Right? Or at least that's what it should be to be Christian. But hopefully that kind of puts into a thought, that kind of helps you with that there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing Proverbs 31 up. Oh, I remember there's a time where I had like Proverbs 31 completely highlighted in my Bible, and I'm like, if I'm not like the Proverbs 31 woman, I can't get married.
I know,
and
but
God
that
won't
yeah,
give me a husband.
but it's a guideline. It's a guideline.
Yeah, for sure. So I am of the camp where, husband should be head of the wife, and there is like an authority there, and there is, I'm of that camp, but there is a lot within that belief that I can't piece together. I think was what I was trying to get at. It was like there's a lot of whys that I don't have answered. And I think a lot of people, when they encounter their own why question that they can't answer, because when you have in the scientific method, if you have a theory, right, and you encounter evidence that shows that that theory actually may not be as true as you think, like you have to unravel it. You know what I mean? If you make a law like Newton's first law or something, and then you find evidence that Newton's first law may not exist, it can't be a law anymore. And something similar with theory. Okay, science. I was about to say science nerds. You guys, science people in the chat. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Gosh.
Otherwise, my whole argument would kind of be unraveled. But my point is, I remember thinking that you had, if you couldn't figure it out, if you couldn't own it, like you had to walk away from it. And I am no longer of that camp. I think and I think this might also be part of the reconstruction process, is being okay with not having answers, but still trusting that God is good anyway. Alive?
Yes.
Agree.
So I want to add to that. So, yeah, like what Tommy said, I totally agree with. And what you said as well, right? The reconstruction process, like it doesn't always have to be. How do I put it? Okay, so when we look at the word deconstruction, like right, like it makes us think, or it gives us this imagery of like, let's say a building.
Oh, I think Steven died. I think his Wi-Fi might have died.
I think his Wi-Fi might have died also. This is a good angle though. Yo.
Okay.
In the meantime, in the 7 minutes that we have left, let's answer Polkadot's. Oh, and he gone. Polkadot Swing's question: do you think that the church has failed women when it comes to marital and conjugal expectations? Is that question allowed? Yes, that question is allowed. I am personally of the opinion. And he's back. And he is back. Hello.
Finish your thought.
Oh, I'm of the opinion that yes, that question is definitely allowed, and I think, yes, the church has failed both men and women when it comes to marital expectations.
Yeah, I don't think it's one way. I think it's both ways.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think
F for Wi-Fi. Yeah, F for Wi-Fi.
All
Sorry,
right,
Steve.
Steven,
Please continue.
Okay, I don't know what happened to my wife. Okay, so when we think of the word deconstruction, right, it makes us think of kind of like a building being torn down, right, and or like whatever something being torn down, right, and then when we think of the word reconstruction, in kind of like connected to that, we always think that it will result, or like I don't know for you guys, but like when I think of like deconstruction and reconstruction, it's always like, for example, like if I'm deconstructing a building, the reconstruction, what ends up happening with the reconstruction is I'm recreating.
Did he freeze for you again?
Yeah, he did.
No.
That's unlucky.
That is unfortunate. That is an
Very
L.
That's a big L. Okay, well,
There is
I don't.
there is a comment in the chat that I wanted to address real quick, where this person's pastor told them that it was sin to be
We'll never
deconstructing.
know.
Oh,
Oh my
Steve, you're
gosh,
back. All right, Steve,
what
finish
is
your thought.
going on? All right, let
Your
me try to
Wi-Fi.
finish my internet.
Quickly,
guys.
quickly.
All right, so when we think of destruction and reconstruction, we're always thinking about the same kind of building, right? Or we're always thinking of the same thing. I think what I've learned is that reconstructing faith doesn't it doesn't necessarily mean that you're reconstructing the same thing. So, as Tommy said, like reconstructing faith doesn't always look like you have to rebuild that specific problem or find a solution to that specific problem. So, for example, your thing about like
Oh no.
Oh no!
oh
No,
my
Oh no, he's back.
Steve.
He's back. Oh, is he back? He's back. He's back.
Hurry,
He's
hurry,
back.
Steve! Hurry, Steve!
So when you deconstructed that problem, you don't necessarily have to always reconstruct a way to fix that or like find a way to fix that problem or find a solution to that answer, right? It can be something that's related to that and you can reconstruct it in a way that's related to that, but it doesn't have to be the exact same or like a better solution of that problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't
agree
know
with
what
you.
the heck is going on.
I'll end with this because I think we are ending soon, right? Yeah, it's almost
Most
10:30.
definitely, yes.
So I'm gonna bring it one more time back to math and science. Look, last one.
This nerd.
I'm gonna
nerd.
do it because it kind of rounds it all together. The whole idea of deconstructing, reconstructing, and you saying about like that sometimes if your theory doesn't work, you leave it. It's like in math and science, the whole idea is you try your best to figure out a way. If it doesn't work, you figure out what's wrong, which is exactly what deconstruction is, and retest your theory, right? So it's like if you hypothesize something and then it doesn't work, you change a variable, you figure out what's wrong, and you do it again, and you do it again and again and again. And so that mindset is actually really good for deconstruction and reconstruction, right? That's the whole scientific method. But not only that, in mathematics, there's a video on it on Veritasium. If you haven't seen it on YouTube, go search it. It's
On
actually really
Wada
good.
Wada?
Math nerd, I know what it means.
So yeah. So in mathematics, there are theories that are not proven. There's things that exist in math that we think is fully true, but no one has proven it yet because it's impossible to prove, whether because there may be a contradiction or a paradox. Or it's just, it goes infinitely long and we just don't know how. Like, there's no exact proof, like an equation for it. So, like, if math can have that, why can't faith have that? Is my point here. Right? So, for some reason, when it comes to the topic of faith, right, Christians seem to, like,
think there has
judge
to be an
themselves harder. Yeah, they
Yeah,
judge
yeah.
themselves way harder than they need to, right? Like, I've talked to my youth group members, like I've seen like these two youth group members of mine. One has thankfully come back stronger in the faith, and one has went further away, right? But the idea here is they both started at a point in grade 12 where they said, I don't know, my faith is weak, and they're judging themselves for it. I don't feel like a Christian. I feel like I'm doing something bad. Like, that's essentially what I was getting. And they both started from that position because in the Christian faith, if you have doubt and you don't believe in God, then you're a sinner. You're not going to be saved. Like, there's such a strong emphasis on you are going to hell, right? Whether we blatantly say that it's not, like we say, if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, then you will be saved. You'll go to heaven, right? That's the baseline. That's all you have to believe in. That's the point. But if you don't believe that, you're going to hell, right? You're not saved. You're going to hell. You're gonna burn in hell. Like, and that's. But the thing is, we can laugh at it because we're Christian and our faith is stronger. But for someone whose faith is not strong, that is life and death, because that's essentially what it is. That is fear, right? That's not fear of God. That's fear of death, right?
Yeah.
And we shouldn't. And so, like, there's so much pressure on an individual, and to have an existential crisis at the age of 17, right, is not fair for the kid, right? When we think of the context, like we say quarter life crisis, midlife crisis, all this kind of stuff, yeah, you're an adult, you can deal with it, you've been through at least part of life. But you're a 16, 17-year-old and a Christian, and the Christian faith is telling you to go through this existential crisis. That's not easy for a 16-year-old. If we're saying they're minors, that is not an easy topic to go through alone. And it's no wonder why these kids feel so pressured and so many doubts come in, right, that they leave. And so, like, but we have to realize, like, even something in math doesn't have a full proof, but yet we believe it is true. And is that not faith in math? So if you have faith in math, you can have faith in God. Like, that's the connection that like we need to make here. Like, you don't have to overly burden yourself to the point where you're like berating yourself and doubt, like hurting yourself and saying you're garbage. I was about to swear again, but you know what it is. Like,
somebody start a swear counter for Tommy, like near swear encounters.
Like, it's yeah, like, to everyone who's listening and those who are watching, like, just always, like, remember that you shouldn't. It's hard because people like we ourselves are sinners, and it is sometimes that we fall short, right? And all the time we do. But don't get yourself down. Don't destroy yourself over it, right?
And
it's good to struggle.
If I may say two more things really quickly before we close. I think when you deconstruct your faith, I think it's not sin to be deconstructing it. But we should, like Tommy said, when we test and retest those theories, test and retest those hypotheses, I think that is something that we should continue to do. I think you owe it to yourself to look for answers. And if you don't find answers, that's totally okay. Your salvation, and that's the second point that I wanted to get at, your salvation is not based on how much you know or how much you are confident in believing. Your faith is not based on how confident you feel in whatever doctrine. It's based on grace through faith alone. That's it. That's those are the only requirements for salvation. So to any Christian out there who is in the process of deconstruction, if to any Christian out there who might be going through some kind of pain from another Christian in their life, for everyone who is not experiencing God, not experiencing his presence, not experiencing him emotionally, if you are in of these three camps, I would just like to close off by encouraging you that God, when he died for you, foresaw that you would go through all of these doubts, and he does not love you a single lick less. That your salvation is not based on how you feel or how much you know or how much you believe. That you are free to go through these doubts and even especially go to God with these doubts, and he will not judge you for having them. It's not a sin to deconstruct. So long as you are continuing to seek him in whatever way you know how. I think that's important. I think you could be in the throes of deconstruction, doubting if God is even good, and you can still approach him. You might not even believe that God is good anymore, but you are still absolutely free to approach him, and he will receive you just the same. So to every Christian out there tonight, going through doubt or not, I just want to say, God waits for you with open arms, and he looks forward to the next time that you guys will chat.
Remember that you're loved.
You are loved. Jesus loves you. That's not a cliche. I mean, it's a cliche at this point, but it's absolute truth. And he loves you no matter what you feel, no matter what you think, no matter what you're doing. All right, that concludes the podcast for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. That was episode 3 of Past the Salt podcast. Please feel free to join our Discord if you would like to suggest what our next topic is. I think we touched upon some spicy ones, like should Christians drink and swear, and what does suffering look like when you're a Christian? Lots of spicy topics. So, if, whatever one you want us to talk about next, feel free to shoot it into the Discord or into the chat. We see those things even after the stream has ended. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and have a good night.
Yeah. Peace out, everybody.
Announcements? Are we doing
Oh.
announcements?
Announcements. Oops.